In this video, we're going to discuss which groups are prepper adjacent. This is a term that I was previously unfamiliar with until I heard it from Ben Peterson, aka Ben Banters. You probably know him from Blade HQ, big time player in the knife community. And he was recently on my Saturday morning live stream, which covers various emergency preparedness topics, or prepper topics. And he's part of the knife community, but he doesn't really consider himself part of the prepper community. So he goes, well, I'm not really a prepper, but I'm prepper adjacent. So for this video, we're going to dive into the topic of prepper adjacent and which groups also belong in that particular category. Let's get started. So before discussing what other groups are also prepper adjacent, let's first talk about what it means to be adjacent. So that comes from a geometry term. So you basically have an endpoint or a vertex, and you have two rays coming out from it, and that creates an angle. Well, an adjacent angle is an angle that shares the same endpoint. So you have an angle here and an angle here. That means that those two angles are adjacent angles to each other. And so what Ben Peterson was trying to say is that the knife community is a adjacent angle to the prepping community. And I figured that there's a lot more adjacent angles out there with the various groups. So we have the knife community, the gun community, the gear community as far as outdoor gear, backpacks, and things like that. Let's talk about all the groups that are considered to be prepper adjacent. So right off the bat, I think all of the various groups that go to SHOT Show in Las Vegas are probably prepper adjacent. So you have the gun community, the knife community, and various miscellaneous bags and things like that. A prepper could go to SHOT Show and be quite entertained over there because all of those groups are considered to be prepper adjacent. So these people might not be preppers, but they're pretty close to being preppers. So they're prepper adjacent. The next group that I consider to be prepper adjacent are survivalists. So just because you're a prepper, that doesn't mean that you're a survivalist, and just because you're a survivalist doesn't mean that you're a prepper. They're a little bit different. They share some common themes though. To me, a survivalist is someone that you could stick out into the woods with a knife and not much else, and they're going to be able to survive out in the woods. They'll be able to catch animals and start friction-based fires and things like that. A prepper would rather have a little bit more gear with them before they go out in that type of situation. They'd rather have a big lighter than use a friction-based drill, and they would rather have mountain house and MREs than have to hunt rabbits or something like that. So to me, while they're similar, a survivalist and a prepper, they're not the same thing, but a survivalist is prepper adjacent. The next group that I consider to be prepper adjacent are ham radio operators. Not all ham radio operators are preppers, but a lot of them are because we share similar interests. When you start getting into emergency preparedness and prepping, you start thinking about things like comms, so how to communicate with people that aren't within your local vicinity. And so you start gravitating towards becoming a ham radio operator and becoming part of a radio club and things like that. But just because you're a ham radio operator doesn't mean that you have a bunch of the other preparedness items. It doesn't mean that you have a full pantry worth of food that's going to last you for 6 months or something like that. But they are very similar, so I consider ham radio operators to be prepper adjacent. Next, I think that those that are in the military, so the various branches, the Army, the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, I consider them to be prepper adjacent as well. Just because you're in the military doesn't mean that you're a prepper. You might not have 6 months worth of food down in your pantry or anything like that. But we have a lot of the same interests. Usually people in the military have some sort of EDC on their person. A lot of the terms that we talk about in preparedness come from military terms. So I think the whole concept of an EDC probably originated from people that are in the military that carry their knives and their various tools that they have on their person. So that doesn't mean that someone that's in the military has all of the supplies that a prepper does, and there's a lot of preppers that are in the military as well. So we're very close. We share a lot of the same ties, and people that are in the military are friends of the preparedness community. So I think anyone in the military is also prepper adjacent. Very similar to those that are in the military, I think that all first responders are also prepper adjacent. So if you're a first responder in the medical field or police or anything like that, you have a lot of the similar traits that the military has as far as having certain set of supplies and skills that they can apply to various situations. I think that those groups are also prepper adjacent. Just because you're a nurse doesn't mean that you're a prepper, but a lot of preppers are nurses and we share common things. We preppers like having various medical supplies like tourniquets and modern wound dressings and things like that. So again, if you're a first responder, EMS, police, firefighter, you're probably prepper adjacent as well. The next group that I consider to be prepper adjacent are those in the outdoor community. So if you go to REI, for example, hikers, backpackers, campers, I consider all those people to be prepper adjacent. So they're very similar to preppers. We share a lot of the same interests. Preppers also like to have backpacks and sleeping bags and bivy bags and the mountain house single servings and the fancy cooking stoves. Preppers like all of those kind of things. But just because you're a hiker or a backpacker doesn't mean that you're a prepper. It doesn't mean that you have 6 months worth of supplies for a grid down situation. But they are friends of the preparedness community. So the outdoor community is prepper adjacent. So far we've been talking about all of the groups that are fairly obvious as far as being prepper adjacent. Let's start talking about some of the other groups now that you might not think about right away. The first group being home organizers. So most likely those are stay-at-home moms that are taking care of the kids, for example, and they're super into home organization. A lot of those moms have awesome pantries that are fully stocked and well organized with all of their various supplies in addition to the other home supplies that they have. They might not be preppers. Maybe most of those supplies are just in their pantry, and with other household normal things, they might not have ham radios, for example, or tactical tools or anything like that. But they're very close to the prepper community with regard to how we're organizing things. I get a lot of my ideas from home organizers as far as the various modules that I use and the color coordination. So I'm going to nominate home organizers as also being prepper adjacent. The next group that I'm going to nominate as being prepper adjacent that you might not think about normally, and those are extreme couponers. Those are the people that go to the grocery store and have a ton of coupons. Most likely, those particular people have an awesome pantry in their basement and they're slowly stockpiling everything. Of course, some of them may just be stockpiling on 100 toothbrushes or something like that. But I think oftentimes extreme couponers, the ones that are saving that hundreds and hundreds of dollars when they go to the grocery store, buying $1,000 worth of supplies for around $100 because they have a ton of coupons. Those groups are also, in my opinion, to be prepper adjacent. We should also probably be thriftier shoppers and look for deals as much as we can. Oftentimes preppers buy things not because they need them, but because it's on sale. So extreme couponers, I believe, are also prepper adjacent. Now, there's a few groups that are so prepper adjacent that I think that they should officially get their preparedness calling card. So they're officially preppers, even though they might not consider themselves preppers. The first one being hunters. Oftentimes, hunters go back and they bring their catch in and they process their meat and they have a freezer in the garage or 2 freezers that are completely filled with meat. Also, fishermen, people that buy salmon, for example, here in the state of Washington, out in the Puget Sound, oftentimes they have a freezer filled with meat that could last them, their family, for a year. I consider those people to already be preppers, even if they don't call themselves preppers. They have a lot of tools, they have a lot of knowledge, and they're able to catch their own food. To me, that's a prepper, and you get your official calling card. This one's pretty obvious. If you're a homesteader, you're also a prepper. That just makes sense. Most preppers want to be homesteaders. I think homesteading is the graduate program of preparedness. So if you're a homesteader, of course, you're already a prepper. Here's a surprise. If you're a zombie hunter, guess what? I have officially given you your prepper card. You're official prepper now. I think if you're prepared for zombies, most likely you're prepared for the coronavirus. You have various water and food and tactical tools and other survival items. So if you're prepared for zombies, you're also going to be prepared for a lot of emergency preparedness events, things that might be a little bit more practical or common, maybe an earthquake or a volcano eruption. If you're prepared for those zombies, you're probably going to be prepared for those things as well. So guess what? If you're a zombie hunter, you're also a prepper. And the final group that is so prepper adjacent that they're basically preppers are gardeners, especially the ones that do edible gardens. So if you make a rose garden, for example, that's not you. I'm talking about the people that make their fruits and vegetables and they can and jar them throughout the year and they have a large pantry filled with all of the stuff that they've grown in their home gardens. Guess what? I consider you guys to be preppers as well, and you get your prepper card. Now, I don't really talk about religion here on my channel, but there are a few religious groups that I also consider to be prepper adjacent. They're so prepper adjacent that they're preppers. The number one being the Mormons, the Church of Latter-day Saints, LDS. Oftentimes I go to the LDS warehouse because they are awesome preppers when it comes to long-term food storage. It's part of the religion to have a year's worth supply of food. So oftentimes I'll go to those warehouses and stock up on wheat and rice and beans and number 10 cans. They're very welcoming of anyone really coming there to build up on supplies. So if you're part of the LDS, if you're part of the Church of Mormon, congratulations, you're also preppers. The Amish community is also so prepper adjacent that they're preppers. They're basically doing off-grid living. So they're having their own food, water, shelter, and all the supplies that they need to live from a day-to-day basis without relying on the grid. So the Amish community is also preppers in my book. Now, there are a few cults that are also probably considered to be prepper adjacent. Sometimes they even have gas masks and other supplies, stuff that's on the tactical side, in addition to long-term food storage. I'm not going to name any of them specifically, but most of those cults have a lot of various emergency preparedness measures into place. So if you're part of a cult, you're probably prepper adjacent. Now that we've discussed the groups that are prepper adjacent, let's discuss a few of them that aren't considered to be prepper adjacent. If you're a software engineer, guess what? I'm sorry, you are not prepper adjacent by nature. You may be a software engineer that's also a prepper, but the group as a whole does not align with the prepper community. Most likely you're relying a little bit too much on the grid for electricity and items like that, the just-in-time delivery for food. You're probably going out for food. That doesn't mean you're not aligning with the preparedness community. So we'd like to encourage more software engineers to become part of the preparedness community, but I'm sorry, the group as a whole is not prepper adjacent. If you're part of the legal community, if you're a lawyer or a paralegal or anything like that, guess what? You are also not prepper adjacent. Your values do not align with the preparedness community, although we do like to have some lawyers in our groups. But I don't think as a whole that the legal community aligns with the preparedness community. We just don't have any common endpoints for the most part, although we would like to have more lawyers that are preppers. But that's for another video. If you're into sales and marketing, I'm sorry, you are not prepper adjacent. Again, you may be a prepper if you're a business person or into sales. We would value people like you in our community, but the group as a whole does not align with the preparedness community. We don't share a common endpoint of our raise. So the sales group is way over there. They have their own endpoint. Preppers are over here. We have our own endpoint. We don't have a common vertex. So I'm sorry, sales and marketing, you are not prepper adjacent. And if you're a professional athlete, I'm sorry to say you are not prepper adjacent. You have a completely different endpoint than what the preparedness community has. We don't have a common endpoint or a vertex. But if you are a professional athlete and you would like to be considered part of the preparedness community in the future, I would like to invite you to send a tax-deductible donation to the Urban Prepper, and I will put it to good use here on YouTube and with the preparedness community for various projects, and we will consider you to be prepper adjacent next year. But for the time being, if you're a professional athlete, you are not prepper adjacent. So why did I make a video going on this rant about prepper adjacent? Well, oftentimes us preppers are interested in making various prepper groups, but sometimes we cannot find like-minded preppers in our area. So one thing that you may want to consider is trying to find someone that's maybe not a prepper, but is prepper adjacent to be part of your preparedness group. I think that's going to be a good strategy moving forward. I think all of us should look at finding allies or friends of the preparedness community. So a lot of the groups that we mentioned, if you're a hunter, if you're a first responder, if you're outdoor community, most likely they're going to be prepper adjacent and they may align with a lot of the same strategies and thoughts that you have as being a prepper. So the whole point of doing this video is to try to identify those groups that are friends of the preparedness community because they are prepper adjacent. That's going to do it for this video featuring the concept of prepper adjacent. I hope that you guys enjoyed watching it. Again, special thanks to Ben Peterson, aka Ben Banters, for initially giving me the idea of prepper adjacent. Please don't sue me because I made a video about it. So leave your comments below in the comment section regarding this topic. Did I miss any other groups? What groups do you think are also prepper adjacent? And if you want, you can list some that are absolutely not prepper adjacent. They don't share a common endpoint with the preparedness community. So leave your comments below in the comment section and stay tuned for more videos. See you guys next time.